Hello, good afternoon, or good morning, or good evening, wherever you're joining us from. My name is George Wright. My pronouns are he, him, and I'm the head of social media here at my G Work, as you can probably see for the big sign behind me. We are delighted to be here this afternoon discussing allyship. But before we get started, if you don't know who My Work are, that's perfectly fine. We're the LGBTQ plus business community, and we are a platform for professionals, graduates, anyone really that believes in workplace equality to come together and connect with one another, attend events like these, check out inclusive job posts, news, and more. I want to say a massive thank you to our sponsor of this session, checkout.com, who is a partner of My Work. If you want to find out more about what Checkout is up to, check out some of the LGBT inclusive jobs that they are advertising and more. You can head over to their page. And I also want to say a massive get well soon to Jess from Checkout, who was hoping to join us this afternoon, but unfortunately is unwell. No trouble there, though. As I said, we've got a fantastic panel ahead of you here today discussing allyship, not only to the LGBTQ plus community, but also to marginalised identities in general. And so I think it's probably time to hear less from me and more from our panels. I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves. Charlene, would you mind kicking us off and introducing yourself?
Right, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone. My name's Charlene Gachette. I work for RS Components. I have been working in the D&I space for about 5 years now, and since joining RS, I've become much more proactive in my allyship to the LGBTQ plus community, and that's me.
Excellent, lovely to meet you, Charlene. Carol, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Hi, good day, everyone. I'm Carol Vincent. My pronouns are she, her, and I am a nurse practitioner who joined Gilead Sciences to work in a public health initiative called FOCUS, which is implementing routine screening and linkage to care for bloodborne viruses like HIV and hepatitis, viral hepatitis. And I'm also a proud member of the Pride Alliance at Gilead, which is our LGBT employee resource group. So I'm really happy to be here to share some insight on our topic.
Pleasure to meet you. Carla, your turn.
Yeah, hi, I am Carla. I work at booking.com. So that's how I got a hold of this amazing panel. Actually, I don't necessarily work directly in anything related to allyship, but I feel very personally and professionally related to that. I work on social media. So I always make sure that this permeates into my personal life and my work. And I'm originally from Mexico, but I have been living in Europe, in the Netherlands, for the past 5 years.
Excellent. Always nice to see someone else in social media. Welcome to the panel, Carla. And finally, last but not least, Georgia, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Thanks, George. Hi, everyone. It's so nice to see you all from all over the world today. So yeah, my name's Georgia. My pronouns are she, her, and I work as a talent sourcer at Softcat PLC. Essentially, my role is to headhunt for candidates for our corporate account executive roles. And it's a brand new role at Softcat, so it gives the team a bit of a capacity to kind of look for groups who may be from, an LGBTQ plus background, a BAME background. So yeah, really, really exciting to be involved with that. I'm also a really proud member of our Pride network at Softcat as well. Get really stuck in doing bits with those as well. So yeah, really happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
Always a pleasure. Well, now we've met everyone, I think it's time. Let's throw ourselves straight into the discussion. Maybe I'd like to start with typically the big questions, but I'm going to throw this out to begin with, and maybe Georgia, if I can stay with you to start with this. What does allyship mean to you specifically? What is allyship to you?
To me, it's supporting the people around you and being there for groups who, in the past, for many, many reasons, have often felt really marginalised due to who they are as a person. I think it's really about kind of empowering people, lifting people up and making them feel really proud and confident about who they are, and really essentially helping them to shine. Recognizing how diversity is always a positive, and understanding that inclusivity, I think, would always lift a group of people, rather than hinder its ability. So really, that's what it means to me.
Fantastic, thank you for sharing. Carol, would you say this is very similar to you? What does allyship mean to you?
Yeah, I think what Georgia said is so important. Is including people and making a comfortable environment to allow people to be themselves, right? We spend a lot of time at work, and for someone to come without their whole self really isn't a great way to feel. And so being an ally, I think, really helps to set the table for, bringing everybody together and allowing people to be their best selves and give what they can, and then supporting people when they're not feeling their best selves.
Excellent. Like I said, love that idea of being able to bring your whole self to work. Charlene has said, what does allyship mean to you?
Very much the same as what Georgia and Carol had to say, but also for me, it's about advocating for people when they're not around. It's probably the biggest part for me, because I have so much opportunity to influence my job, in the job that I do, and speaking up for those that can't speak up for themselves is probably the most important part of being in my life for me.
Oh, perfect. I really like that. And I think definitely some proactive tips there that we can come to shortly. Carla, I said three sort of meanings so far. What does allyship mean to you?
For me, and how I've been dealing with allyship the last decade of my life, for me, it just translates, and I am oversimplifying, but it translates into action. Because it's you can also be a passive ally, but I wouldn't say that's the type of allyship I feel encouraged to promote in my world. So for me, it just translates into action to do everything that these amazing ladies already said: help, support, encourage, etc.
Thank you for that. And I appreciate, I said, all of you giving your own sort of definitions and perspectives on that. Carla, if I can stay with you, you mentioned in your introduction, you may not necessarily explicitly work in allyship, as it were, but you still feel quite strongly about it. Do you mind if I ask you maybe sort of why you became an ally, or what made you want to become an ally?
Sure. And I'm going to make it very simple, and please don't feel uncomfortable because of my story. But basically, and again, very simplified, first, back in Mexico, things are not as forward as I would love them to be. And I only say this because now I have a different perspective living in Northern Europe. So when I was back in Mexico in my very early 20s, totally oblivious to the whole world, I had a friend that was going through many, many things because she belongs to the LGBTQ plus A plus community. And I was totally unaware of her own journey until the moment that she tried to harm herself. And that's the moment that I became like awoke and aware of everything that was going on around me. That's what prompted my journey with allyship and why I feel so strongly about being active on it. And how I try to do it in my profession, it's just making sure that this is permeable to everything that we do. It doesn't matter which company I work for or what am I doing in that moment. But diversity, allyship, it's not a quota, and it should not be taken as that. So that's how I focus my journey, basically.
Thank you for sharing that, and I appreciate. I said it is a very personal thing to share, so thank you. Definitely some fantastic points there about. I said wherever you are, whatever you're doing. Oh my goodness, taking the arm off it. Wherever you are, whatever you're doing. I said the power of allyship. Thank you for that. Charlene, what's your journey been like, and why did you become an ally?
My journey to becoming an active ally has actually been quite a long one. So I started off as quite a passive ally. So when I was in my early 20s, a family member came out to us, and coming from a West Indian background, notorious to be very unaccepting of people from the LGBTQ plus community. And it broke my heart seeing somebody that I loved so broken by the response of her family. And so I was vocal within the safe space of my family and calling people out and telling people that, this is not what we do, and, this is not how we treat our family. But I wasn't speaking up in the way that I should have outside of my family unit. And then going into the work world, there was a period of time where it seemed like the only people who belonged to the LGBTQ community were white men. And I'm like, well, it's not really that big of a deal for them because they have all the privileges associated with being white men. So, you know, it's not my fight was kind of what it was. When it came to my family and acceptance, it was, but outside of that, it wasn't. But as I grew as a person and as a human being and started to see the wider community, I was like, actually, I'm seeing things happening in this world that it's not right and it's not good. So I would start calling people out, but it wasn't as active as it should be. But then once I got to RS, a whole world opened up for me of things that I didn't know about. I've learned so much more, and I'm much more confident in my allyship now and calling people to account, whether it be at work, whether it be at home, wherever it is, reading, learning, speaking to people, just understanding people's experiences and advocating for people when there is no one else in the room advocating for them. So it was a long journey, longer than it probably should have been, but I'm there now.
That's what we like to hear. And I really like that use of the word active ally. I think that's a very interesting distinction, and definitely something I want to pick back up on maybe in a little bit. But no, thank you for sharing that, Charlene. And I appreciate that everyone on our panel sharing sort of very personal experiences. Carol, has it been sort of a similar journey for you?
Yeah, a long one as well. You know, I'm older now for sure. And when I was in high school, I had a friend who, two of my best friends, one whispered in my ear, you know, I like him, and he was a him. And I was like, okay, that's great. Like, I'm really happy for you two. And, you know, I thought it was just really confusing because being naive, he said, whispering, you know, you can't tell anybody. And from that moment, it got my wheels turning. You know, I was probably 14 at the time and really not understanding what that meant. Watching how they were, as they were together and kind of hiding, how uncomfortable it made me feel that someone would have to hide who they are. And as I got into school, you know, and went to school for nursing and realized that, you know, none of it made sense, that people shouldn't have to ever hide who they are. And as I finished nursing and I started a career in HIV nursing for a really, really long time, and infectious diseases as well. And I got to see firsthand how people were treated, whether or not they had HIV, whether or not they identified as lesbian, gay, bi, transgender, you know, two-spirit, intersex. It baffled me that people felt the need to make people feel inequitable. For me, then it became the remembering the whisper from my friend and thinking no one should ever have to whisper. And from that moment, and through being a nurse and taking care of folks who have been marginalized for a really long time and not being able to be themselves, I decided that it was something important and to be vocal. You know, I know we talk about advocacy. It is really important to not other people and to make people feel like they can be themselves around you. It's what makes life beautiful as far as I'm concerned. I think that I love getting to know people. Charlene talked about privilege, and I have to say that we all need to examine the privilege that we bring. I know I have a certain privilege as a white woman, and I certainly do not discount that. I am vocal, and I stand up for people when I see inequities. And I also have worked with youth a lot and help empower and really model for people what it should be like, and to have conversations and to really think about like what safety could be in danger, and helping people kind of get to the point where they can be themselves. It's a very hard thing for people, and life is hard. So I just don't think we need to make it harder for others. And being an ally means that, you know, I work every day to make sure that life isn't hard for people. It's an uphill struggle, as I think everyone on this call knows.
I really love the point you made about privilege. And no, absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts to this. Carol, I really appreciate it. Georgia, So I know we've heard a lot about sort of people's journeys. What's your journey been?
It's been slightly different, I'm not going to lie. So I'm quite fortunate, really. I've come from a family where, you know, inclusivity has always been welcomed. You know, I feel like I've grown up really open-minded, but it was a real kind of learning curve for me when I transitioned from just kind of supporting people who are from, say, an LGBTQ plus background to really being proactive and seeing the kind of gratitude that they have when you're being proactive in educating yourself, you know, supporting them, speaking outright, as Charlene said, if you need to, whether that's, you know, in the workplace, even on nights out and things. Being kind of really proactive, that's when I saw a massive change. The kind of gratitude you see in your friends when they know you're being proactive and doing something for their community is completely different to just saying, yeah, I support people who are from, you know, an LGBTQ plus background. And then it's the education piece as well. Like when I kind of started to realize, you know, when I started kind of looking into people's backgrounds and like the history, you know, LGBTQ plus history, I just felt a lot more connected to those around me. There's a bit of a wall sometimes if you are not aware of people's paths that they've been on and people's backgrounds. It does kind of put up a bit of a wall. So breaking that down and teaching yourself, speaking to people, trying to educate yourself, for me, that was so integral when it comes to practicing empathy, and it opens doors for you understanding, you know, other people's backgrounds and recognizing people's kind of strengths and their diversities. So it was just that kind of learning piece from me, going from, yeah, I stand with, you know, people who are you know, gay, lesbian, queer, anything like that, to really being proactive and being on board with them on their team. And that's when I think it was when I got into the workplace, really, when I kind of discovered how important that was going to be. And then it's been, you know, a real nice journey from there. And I still think it's a long way to go as well. Being, you know, a straight white woman, I feel like I can never say, oh, I'm the perfect ally. It's always going to be a learning piece, but it certainly started when I kind of discovered, you know, the importance of really understanding these different types of people.
Absolutely. And yeah, I suppose the idea of it being a journey, and I guess, yeah, a journey that doesn't end, is quite pertinent. And that draws me actually to the next kind of topic I want to discuss. And I want to come back to, so the concept of privilege and the intersectional nature of our personalities has come up now a few times. And I kind of want to talk about that, because whilst always it is important to be, you know, allies to the LGBTQ plus community, you know, we've also got to consider allyship as to other communities, such as, you know, well, women, non-binary people, etc., people of color, class, across race, etc. And so I wondered if the panels had any thought in terms of, I guess, how we can best use our privilege, or best recognize our privilege when it comes to allyship. Charlene, do you mind if I come to you first? Or Carla, perhaps if you were really no, go on. Sorry, Charlene. Carla was straight on it. My apologies, Carla.
No, sorry. It's just that I was actually quite eager to actually address this when I was already hearing some of the things you guys were mentioning before. And for me, it starts with, so before you actually jump into privilege, it comes to being very mindful of your own identity. Because if you don't know who you are, you don't know how you can actually help others to express and empower who they are. So the first thing you need to, and it's actually more difficult than you would think, because we are just totally oblivious to who we actually are and the power that we have or don't have. And so the first thing that helped me through my journey, and that I always encourage people around me to actually be conscious about, is your own identity. And like, ask yourself, what are like the aspects of my whole being that actually have the most impact on how you perceive yourself, and how all those aspects and factors actually have an impact on how others perceive you and how others actually relate to you. And from then, that's your first step to actually know in which side of the scale you are actually at, and how much you can give and take on this empowerment journey through privilege or not.
Absolutely. I really like that, like as a model, I guess, for examining privilege. Thank you for that, Carla. Charlene, did you want to add to that?
I suppose the only thing I could add to that is, from a person who doesn't have that much privilege and never really saw myself as a person of privilege, where I began to realise that actually there are privileges afforded to me that are not afforded to a whole community of other people, is that if I don't advocate for people who are suffering very similar things to I am, maybe in a different way, and the reasoning behind it is different, but if I am not advocating for them, how can I then expect anyone to advocate for me? It just didn't make any sense. I mean, it was, I think they call it the aha moment. I was just like, I cannot possibly say that I want other people to advocate for me when I'm not here and ensure that I have fair and equal access to the same things as everybody else if I am not doing exactly the same thing when I have an audience, because of the work that I do, I often have an audience. Within the family context, I'm doing all right in the family context, and people generally listen to me when I say stuff. So why wouldn't I take that and use it to my advantage and to their advantage and say, actually, I don't like the way that you're speaking about said person. It doesn't make me feel comfortable. It's not right. And why are you doing it? And in like the family situation, I often say there is a fear that we would have because of the history that we've had in the UK with racism and that kind of stuff. And fear breeds ignorance a lot of the time. And if you are treating people badly because you fear them, because you don't understand them, how can you then expect other people to treat you with open arms and welcome you? So although I don't perceive myself to be someone of much privilege, there are arenas where I am privileged, and in those arenas, I make sure that I stand up and I speak for people who can't speak for themselves. So.
And I think that's a really great point, that idea that I guess an alliance is a mutually beneficial thing. You know, it said we're all helping each other pull each other up. Thank you, Charlene. Carol, I know you'd had some thoughts on privilege. I don't know if you wanted to expand on those.
Yeah, I think Carla said it, and obviously Charlene, everyone on this panel is amazing. I'm glad that we're all allies, because we have to examine and be accountable too. If you don't know who you are, it's hard to hold yourself accountable, right? So holding yourself accountable and then holding other people accountable. I know when Charlene talked about family, there are times, and I'll share a personal example. I have a nephew who is transgender. I actually have a son who is gay, who identifies as gay. And I'll hear people in the family, and it's mostly extended family. My nuclear family is very accepting. But, when Georgia said, most people I knew originally were accepting, you hear little comments that people make that are really could be very, very hurtful. I've seen it in religious settings. I've seen it in healthcare settings where people don't think about the things they say. And so really thinking and listening and hearing yourself, not only yourself, but hearing what other people are and gently correcting people. I've found that when you come at people harshly to say, oh, I can't believe you said that, you shut them down immediately. That's been my experience. And so, showing, as my boss would always say, curiosity, be curious about what people are saying and talk to them about why and how they may not perceive that what they said is hurtful. They're little sayings that people say all the time. They don't give a second thought to, but, could be very hurtful. And in family gatherings, we recently had, when my nephew was there, who is transgender, somebody actually said, well, I don't know what to call it. And it was an older person. Besides pulling my jaw up off the floor, it was actually quite easy for me to talk to that person, to talk about how offensive that was. And that person actually went and apologized, had no idea, was actually a person that was in their 80s, had no idea that, this was offensive or hurtful, and just basically called them out on it. But they actually listened and we had a good dialogue. It didn't take away the sting though, and my nephew left the party shortly thereafter. So it's a lot for people to have to continually have this assault on them and having to defend themselves. So I think being an ally, sometimes it's helpful to take that on. A person should not have to continually educate when they identify in a group that may have difficulty, constantly having to explain. I think it's exhausting, and it's actually quite daunting for people to do. So being an ally matters for that as well.
Thank you for sharing. And I think it really does highlight the idea that actually just approaching people and say, this isn't right, this is how it should be, how receptive people can be to that. Thank you, Caroline. I really, really appreciate your contribution there. Georgia, I know you're kind of hinting on it or touching on it a little bit in your last point about sort of when you mentioned about privilege, but I just wondered if there was anything else you wanted to add on that, sort of in light of our discussion.
Yeah, everyone's kind of hit the nail on the head there. I would say it's really about using your privilege to speak for people who may feel marginalised. And sometimes people, some people might just feel that internally, maybe I can't say this because I feel this way. Well, just make sure you lift these people up and use your privilege to just lift these people up and, help them have the voice that they don't feel like they have. I think as well, when it comes to a kind of privileged perspective, it does enable us to, say in the workplace, we maybe do have more of an impact. If groups feel marginalized and feel like they don't have a voice, they may kind of, take a back burner a little bit and might not want to kind of influence decisions, etc. Make sure you're doing that for them. Make sure you're helping, everyone to be on the same level. Encourage people to speak up, to speak their mind, to speak what they want to say. So yeah, it's just about, using the kind of position that you're in to ensure that everyone's feeling as equal as possible.
Excellent. Carla, you've popped your hand up. Did you want to add something?
Yeah, just adding that it's also, again, I'm talking from my own experience and from when I try to raise these concerns with the people around me, is there's not only one kind of privilege, and privilege is also contextual. So, for example, if I go to Mexico, I have privilege because I have white skin, but in here, I have no privilege because I have white skin. Maybe in some points in my life, I have privileges because I'm a woman, but probably for other things, I do not have privilege because I'm a woman. In some instances, I might have privilege because I live in an European northern country, but in other instances, I might not have privilege because I'm a Latina living in a European country. So privilege is also contextual. So it's very important that you are actually very aware, not only on your own identity and privileges, but also how these privileges apply or not apply in the context that you are in that moment.
Absolutely. And I think context is one of those things that vitally, I think all of us sort of here and in general, I think can do so much more to be so much more aware of. Thank you for that, Carla. To pivot a little bit, I know we've talked a lot about sort of personal experiences and sort of in that regard to allyship. To pivot a little bit towards, I guess, the workplace in this regard, as we mentioned, sort of various involvements with allyship in the workplace. I wondered if our panel had any thoughts on sort of things that workplaces can do to promote allyship, or I guess create more allies. Carla, do you mind if I come back to you first on this, if that's all right?
Yeah, I'm actually quite happy to be here. Also, a bit in the name of Booking.com. Of course, my opinions are my own and not those of my employer, but I do feel that Booking.com has done very, very well in terms of empowering allyship throughout the whole organization. Some examples of what they do, what we do. We have different groups or associations, but these associations, yes, they are employee-led, but then again, they do have resources and support by the company. So we have Be Equal for women. We have Be Bold for Black people. We have Be Harmony for Asian groups. We have Be Proud for the LGBTQAA plus community, and more upcoming. And of course, these are kind of the main ones, but Booking.com actually has resources, infrastructure, and actually actively supports, these entities. Furthermore, Booking.com puts the money where their mouth is. So, for example, right now in the context I am, Booking is main sponsor for Prouds for the Pride in Amsterdam. So we put a lot of money on that sponsorship. We have this promotion going on right now that people can book this amazing accommodation for Pride in Amsterdam. We also have a Travel Proud badge. So that means that when you're looking for accommodations on Booking.com, you actually can search and filter by Travel Proud. That means that those accommodations have gone through some courses and expertise and trainings that we offer them to become a whole entity of welcoming and being more observant of what they actually offer as an accommodation to the community, LGBTQ plus community. So that's the type of employer I actually feel very proud to work for. It's not only words, it's not only paper, it's not only panels, it's actually, they do invest and they prioritize inclusion, diversity, and support and allyship.
Excellent, thank you for that. And now trying to figure out how I can get to Pride in Amsterdam. But no, thank you for that, Carla. I appreciate it. I need to get like a whole calendar going. I'm quite failing in this regard. But no, thank you, Carla. Georgia, did you have any thoughts on sort of how workplaces can encourage allyship?
Yeah, definitely. I feel privileged in the sense that I work for a company who really do encourage a lot of allyship. But I think what an issue is in multiple businesses is that it tends to trickle down from the top. And if you've got a kind of board of white male privileged, people, then it can be really hard to trickle that, down into the workplace. I think especially from my perspective, as I say, I'm really lucky to work for a company who does proactively, encourage allyship. But if you didn't, I look at my workplace, and if we didn't, I'm one of kind of 1,800 employees. I'm, in no kind of management position. How on earth would I, be able to make such an impact? That's really going to change the way a company thinks and operates. So I do think it starts at the very top. But if you've got that kind of, board level of, really kind of inclusive, diverse people, then it can be great. And like Carla said as well, so we've got quite a lot of similar things at Softcat. So we have our networks. As I said, I'm part of the Pride Network. And it's such a great space because it allows people to go and feel safe with their community, but also allows allies to go in and educate themselves. And that really is encouraged in our workplace. And I think it's just such an excellent thing to do. If you do feel in a position where you can have that kind of influence and you think you can get this employee-led, kind of network growing within the business, I think it's just absolutely amazing. So yeah, I think things like that can always be really helpful. I think as well, if you feel like whoever you work for, they're struggling to really gauge how, the business can be diverse and inclusive, reach out externally. Look at this kind of, the panel we've got on today, working with My G-Work. You don't have to know everything inside. You can have help externally from others. I can think of multiple businesses that would be happy to run workshops, run panels, come in and do kind of guest speakers, just to provide that kind of education piece. Because as we say, sometimes we don't know everything. We are on a journey. We do need help from others to help us to understand and really grow. So reaching out externally can be really, really helpful too. One final thing, so Softcat actually run an allyship program, which I think is absolutely amazing. It's not kind of limited to LGBTQ plus. It's limited to allyship across the board. So whether that's, racial diversity, people who are kind of, less able than others, in a kind of physical sense. And just, I think that the kind of nature of the program, it's to really encourage people to empathize with people who are not similar to themselves. And this is, I'm sure lots of kind of companies are doing it now, but certainly in my kind of professional history, it's not something I've seen before. And, we're having kind of employees completing the program, coming away from it probably before being relatively closed-minded, and their eyes are just absolutely open. There's been no kind of negative feedback from this program. We hire a lot of graduates, people who are kind of straight out of school, then uni, and have been in kind of closed kind of bubbles at university, etc., and have not really been exposed to a diverse world. They're coming out of this program thinking like, oh, you know, I had no idea. I would never have thought that previously. Things like this can be absolutely amazing. As I said, it can be challenging because these kind of decisions do come from relatively high up, and I don't know whether anyone else would have, you know, thoughts on how we could maybe get around that. But you know, once companies start introducing things like this, I think it's just going to be really, really groundbreaking.
Absolutely. I think that's a really interesting point actually about, I guess, the opposite of trickling down and sort of bottom up approach in that regard. I wonder to what extent you think that, so obviously I wonder to what extent, just maybe as a small follow-up, you think that things like these allyship programs, etc., do go some way into helping change the cultures at the top of some of these companies. I don't know if you had any thoughts on that at all.
Yeah, I think they do completely change. I mean, so our company, it's an IT sales company, and the kind of generic, you know, employee, the kind of our generic employees, it's a predominantly male, predominantly white, and a lot of people who are just kind of fresh out of university, etc., you know, like looking to pursue a career in sales and do really well. So people can be quite close-minded, and honestly, the amount of people now, I think about 80 and 90% of the business has now completed the allyship program, and you can see doors opening up. So for example, one of my good friends, she's a lesbian, and she had a guy, your typical kind of salesy lads, messaged her after the allyship program just to say, look, I want to learn more about, you know, what does it mean to be lesbian? What can I do to help you? And she was so touched by this because he was just a kind of guy who probably would seem your typical kind of closed-minded kind of person, and she was so touched by this, and she was so happy to pick up the phone and have a conversation with him. And that wouldn't have happened if that allyship program wasn't in place. And even if that's just changed that one person's outlook and opens his mind a little bit more, then I see that as a bit of a success, you know, even if it's having these tiny kind of impacts, you know, helping one or two people think about the world in a little bit of a different way, then to me in itself that's a success. So yeah, I think it's a really, really positive thing.
Absolutely. I'm glad to hear it. More road to Damascus moments. I appreciate that massively, Georgia. Thank you. Carol, sort of, I guess, coming over to healthcare and sort of from your workplace, what do you think workplaces can do to create more allies?
Yeah, I think building community is key in this. One thing that, you know, as Georgia and Carla were speaking, I was thinking about what companies are often accused of, and that's performative allyship. Gilead has been very open, and obviously I don't speak for the company, you know, as Carla would say, but I have to say, when I came here, the employee resource groups were not as active, and now they really are. We've had some change in leadership, and it has become a priority. So diversity, equity, and inclusion is constantly in a forward motion, which I think is great. I also think, though, when we create employee resource groups, that they can sometimes become siloized. So what I've seen, and being part of the Pride Alliance community outreach group, is that we are constantly thinking of ways to engage with other employee resource groups, and we frequently do. And then again, building a communication matrix of sorts to make sure that other people in the company who don't engage with the employee resource groups are hearing what we're doing. Seeing what we're doing. So, you know, whether it's on the company page that you see when you open your computer every day, or you're hearing from other people in the company, you know, sharing information. I think that there's always an opportunity to build bridges and to make sure that people are crossing them, right? To working together, to building those communities that make your workplace a place you want to go every day. And, you know, I do have to say this, and it's not, it's sincere when I say it. It's the company that I work for has provided so many opportunities. And we're a company that does a lot of work with community in general, right? You know, we're a company that has provided care for HIV and other infectious diseases and now cancer. And we're always looking to communities to see how we can best provide healthcare. And I'm proud of that. Having come from the healthcare community as a healthcare provider and now working for a pharmaceutical company that, sometimes gets a bad rap because of, pharmaceutical companies can't understand what happens in community. I think they really strive to continue to walk the walk and make life better for people, whether it be through medicine or through philanthropy and such. I think it is very important. It's the place I spend most of my day, right? When I think about life, you're either at work, you're sleeping, right? Or you're with your family for a short period of time, or people that you choose to hang with. And I think that work shouldn't be a place where you're not comfortable. So I'm proud to be in a company that tries to be as inclusive as possible.
I think that's a fantastic message. I think the work shouldn't be a place where you're uncomfortable. Thank you for that, Carol. Charlene, any thoughts from yourself on sort of creating more allies in the work?
Much else to add to what everybody else has said. It's that thing of utilising your employee networks, but actually there's also this bit which I don't think we addressed, which is our organisations have to address their culture. It has to be a safe place where you can be an ally and an active ally rather than a passive ally, because it's a safe place to do so. And not all organisations, although they may have employee resource groups and great D&I policies and all of the processes in place that say that they're an inclusive employer, but if you actually don't have the freedom to actively open your mouth and speak up without fear of recognition for speaking up, that to me is one of the biggest things. Being a true ally is having no fear of speaking up and calling people out, whether it be your colleague who sits next to you every day, or the vice president, or even the president of the company. If you see it and you know it's wrong, being brave enough and not there being no consequences to calling out stuff when you see it. So that not all companies can do it, but that is the thing, that if we can have all of our companies doing that, what a wonderful world it would be.
Absolutely. And what a powerful point, I think, to wrap that question up on, is at the point that, a little bit of introspection sometimes goes a very, very, very long way. Thank you for that. I see we've got a question in our chat, so I'm going to come and take that quickly. Dana Gray asks, how do I go from being a passive ally to an active ally in my workplace? Charlene, I know I said you mentioned about passive to active allies earlier. I don't know if maybe you wanted to start us on this question.
Have you joined not just the staff network that represents you or represents your particular interest, but I've joined all of the staff networks, even things that I don't feel closely connected to, because together, having that broad picture of all of the marginalised people within our organisation, I get a holistic view. And then when things happen that could affect one maybe directly and one indirectly, I can say, actually, if you do this, it may work really well for this group of people, but the impact it has on another group of people can actually be this. And also joining all of the different staff networks raised my consciousness about everything else. And it gives you that safety and security to be more active when you speak up, because you have all of these people around you who are supporting you in your journey to being an active ally. And don't only rely on other people to tell you their stories. People don't often want to relive their trauma. So do a bit of reading on your own, do a bit of research. The internet is a wonderful thing. And they're not maybe specific questions, rather than asking people to just divulge their life story to you.
Thank you for that. Some really good pointers there. I'll open this up, I guess, the rest of our panel. Did anyone else have any thoughts on turning passive into active allyship? Georgia, do you mind if I come to you?
Yeah, definitely. I think coming again, kind of touching back on that privilege piece. Don't be afraid to say how you feel. I feel like if you're coming from a passive allyship, you'll have a good sense of how to be an ally anyway. So turning that into a proactive allyship, say how you feel, support your friends, support your colleagues, go out your way to make a difference. And as we've been saying continuously, make them feel supported and uplifted. It can be a bit intimidating sometimes. I feel, especially, when you don't know too much, it's like, oh, well, like, for example, me today, I was like, oh, do I know enough about being an ally to, be on this panel? But don't be afraid to give your thoughts. You will have a really good sense of how you can support these people from these different kinds of backgrounds, and use what you've learned and the people that you've met and the kind of research that you've done to really be outspoken and proactive with them. And you'll see straight away the kind of impact that it's having. You'll see people's faces light up when you turn around and you support someone in front of other people, in front of you can be really kind of proactively supportive. So don't be afraid to kind of use what you know and how much you care for others to really show your support and allyship.
Excellent, thank you. Some more great points there as well. Carla, you've got your hand up. Did you want to add something?
Yeah, just very quickly that at your workplace, also, if you don't recognize any type of like oppression or problem happening at your workplace, you can still be an active ally with your workplace. So even if it's not happening within your company, there's always something that your company can do in the greater scheme of things. So also try to open these conversations up. If everything is running smooth and everyone is happy within your workplace, then that's amazing. How can we enable everyone else to actually feel like we feel right now?
Fantastic. Thank you for that contribution, Carla. And Carol, had said any advice yourself on passive to active?
Yeah, I think one thing that people don't often do is look to see what actually exists in their companies. There are still companies that don't have employee resource groups or groups that are supportive. And so I think it doesn't mean you have to start the group yourself. I think you can start, person to person, but I do think that we as employees need to hold companies accountable for creating workspaces that people want to work in, where they can bring their whole selves to work, right? And I also think that if someone doesn't want to share, their personal journey or, want to come out at work, because as my colleagues always say, I have to come out all the time. Every interaction is a potential for me to have to come out. And I imagine that's, I watch it, I see it, it's got to be exhausting. So creating just that one-to-one space for people to be themselves without having to tell you a story every time they meet with you, right? But also thinking about how you can hold companies accountable. And I know that feels like something that takes a lot of power to do, but I think it's just really speaking up and saying, we don't have that here. And I've heard it's happening at other companies. How might we start that here? And you can start with human resources, or your boss or your colleagues, and kind of come together and have the discussion. I think that's how employee resource groups started. Where the employees were saying, how can we support each other? And then going to leadership and bringing that, the ideas together. So, it's a constant dialogue and constant communication. And I think that communication is key to making it happen. And I saw somebody put in the chat that they're afraid of saying something wrong. You're always going to say something wrong. It's how you respond to that wrong saying when you realize, oh, that might have hurt somebody's feeling. Realize that, acknowledge it, apologize for it. How can I do better and move on? People really appreciate when you do that. I still have trouble on occasion, saying pronouns. I get mad at myself because, I've worked in healthcare around a lot of folks who identify as LGBT, persons of color. I think of just even gendering folks, right? We have to be very careful not to hurt feelings, but when we do, to be sorry for it and try to do better the next time. We're human, we're not perfect.
Excellent. I I love doing panels like this. It's had so many fantastic points coming at it. Thank you so much, everyone. I'm very conscious of time, so I'm going to move us to wrap up, I think, with one last question, finally, for our panel. And that is simply, for the benefit of our audience or anyone watching this, if you could give one piece of advice to our audience on things they could do to be a better ally, what would it be? Charlene, do you mind if I come to you first?
Sure, that's a hard one to start off with, but okay. I'd probably say the one thing that I would say is there's no such thing as a bad ally. Any kind of allyship is good allyship. And my journey to being an active ally was a journey. Not everybody can wake up one morning and say, I'm going to stand up for the wrong that's happening in this world. And even if you're not ready to be that vocal ally, just being there and being supportive to people, even if it's just somebody who sits next to you and you know that they're struggling, even if it's as simple as that, any kind of support and any kind of allyship is acceptable. There isn't a gold standard of being an ally. I think that would be my bit of advice.
Excellent. Thank you. Carol, if I can come down to you, what's your advice?
I think to continually educate yourself, right? To keep learning and do that respectfully. That, to me, Charlene, I love what you said, because I think you're right. The journey never ends, and there's so many resources there. You can, obviously, the caution I have is to not continually come to the person that, I have a transgender friend who says to me, it's exhausting for me to have to educate people all the time. So thinking about how a person feels, right? And so educate yourself, and there are a lot of resources for that. If someone wants to talk to you about it, take them up on it, but don't expect that from people.
Fantastic. Thank you for that, Carol. Carla, your advice to our audience.
So I would like to divide it in two. So the first one is on the personal sides. I could always recommend, after you did everything you can do for yourself, then start trying to get allies to your allyship. So start with the people closest to you, with your family, with your friends, and convince them to join your allyship journey, so then you can make these bigger and bigger around you. So that's in the personal side. And in the professional side, I actually wrote 5 points, which I'm just going to read because I'm very conscious of time. And it all starts while listening and understanding, and the willingness to learn from the experiences of others on the workplace. So the first one is, for example, if you're in a meeting or with a group of people, try to draw attention to your colleagues' contributions if that person is from a marginalized group. The second one is, like, you can also use personal resources to recommend and help marginalized people that belong to marginalized groups succeed. Talking about introduction, networking, recommendations for jobs, etc. Third thing is actively, and this is probably the most difficult one, but it's actively confront bad behavior or something that you see that's wrong. Like, do not be that silent person, because it gets you into the point where you are an accomplice of what's happening and going on. And I know it's hard, but if you really truly want to be an ally, then you have to get over your own fears and do it for someone else. And finally, encourage allyship with your colleagues as well. So tell them to use their resources to recommend people, to draw attention to others, to support each other. And that's what I had for you.
Excellent. A very comprehensive list. Thank you very much, Carla. And finally, I said last but not least, Georgia, your advice.
Yeah, so it kind of touches on everyone's points, really. I think one thing is that you don't have to commit to changing the world if you want to be an ally. I think even taking small steps, go out, read a book, watch a film that kind of supports that kind of LGBTQ plus, content, etc. Small steps means you're being a proactive ally. You can do tiny little things. So don't expect that you're going to have to change the world to be able to label yourself a proactive ally, because it's not the case. The smallest things will make a huge difference. the education piece as well falls massively into that. You know, it even just kind of educating yourself on a bit of LGBTQ plus history, and you know, you're reading articles, things like that, that can make a huge difference. And finally, like I said earlier, you know, with my friend who had the boy reach out to her around being a lesbian, I think sometimes you may feel a bit hesitant to want to speak to someone about their sexuality or how they identify. People want to talk about that. You know, it's always a positive thing. You know, I mean, I know some people have, you know, negative experiences, and, you know, they may not feel 100% comfortable, but I can genuinely say, you know, a lot of people that I've met who sit within that LGBTQ plus space are so loud and proud and really happy to talk about it. So go ask them, go and say to them, you know, how's your experience been? What can you say to me? How can you educate me on what your experiences have been like? They'll love you asking that question. And as long as you're doing it, you know, in a considerate and thoughtful way, then I think it's always going to invite a really positive conversation, and it's helping you to understand, you know, the path and the journey that people have been on. So yeah, that'd be my advice.
What fantastic points to finish up on. I want to say a massive thank you to our panel this afternoon. It has been a pleasure and a privilege to sit and listen to both your stories, your thoughts, and your contributions on allyship and the work that we can all do to be better allies to one another. So massive thank you to all of you. I want to say another big thank you to checkout.com, who was the sponsor of this session. Instead, if you want to find out more about what they're up to, head over to their My G-Work page. Starting in just a minute, we have an event coming up about building your network and making sure that you've got the right people around you, which you can check out. The link is down in the chat. And yeah, thank you very much, everyone. It's been lovely to see all of you, and we hope to see you again at our next event. See you soon, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.